Welcome to my YouTube channel, Surowicz Watercolor. At any time during this video, you can click on the link in the lower right hand corner to subscribe to my channel. Be sure to click on the Learning Center link at the end of this video to learn more about my YouTube videos, self-paced courses, and live online classes and workshops. Hi, I'm Rick Surowicz. I'm here in my studio, and I thought I'd do a short video tip today on how to maintain moisture in your paper. I've had some comments recently by some of the participants in my online classes that are experiencing difficulty with that. And I've heard from some people outside of my class too, and literally from different places around the world. In the particular class, we're doing some exercises that may require you to keep the paper saturated in order to get the behavior of the paint that you're after, to get these soft, diffused edges. So it's very important to be able to maintain a proper level of moisture content. And I'm going to do just a little exercise here just to demonstrate some ideas here, because it's going to vary from person to person. It's going to depend on the paper you're using. It could be impacted by the angle you work at. Like I said, the climate. You can get moisture. If you're in a moist climate, you're going to have moisture in your paper to some degree just from the atmosphere. But if you're in a very arid climate, it's going to just evaporate. So one of the things I want to give some suggestions on is try to use as big a brush as you're comfortable with. If I'm going to put a wash down, a lot of times I'll use this wash brush. It holds quite a bit of moisture, and it's very soft, and you can really load it up and it'll put a bead down. Now if I was working with a brush like this, just a sable, it's a round sable, about a size 6, it'll load, but it's really not going to hold that much water. And if I want a little bit more, sometimes I'll use this 1/2 inch or this 1 inch flat wash brush, or I have a 2.5 inch if I really wanted to load my paper up if I was working on a larger sheet. But I'm going to demonstrate with these two brushes. So I have a box on each side, and I'm going to mix just one color here. I'll mix this royal blue that I like to work with, and I'm going to make a big pool of color here, more than what I need for this, but I just want to show you how much water I have here, how fluid this is. In this brush, you can see it will load up. It's dropping off the brush. There's so much water in it. Now if I take this number 6 brush, it's going to dispense some water when it's fully loaded, but it's not going to have near the coverage of this. So if I were trying to put an even wash over this shape here, and I had this number 6 brush, one of the things I'll mention is I'm at about a 20-degree angle, so moisture is going to start to be pulled by gravity downwards. And one of the things that's going to do, it's going to make the paper dry quicker up here than down here, because this moisture is going to be coming down and it's going to come to the edge of where I'm going to stop wetting the paper. And the other thing is your coverage when you're putting moisture in your paper isn't always going to be exact. It's not, you're not going to get a perfect distribution across the whole page. So the application of the moisture is going to vary. So the paper is going to dry at different rates. So it may be very wet here, but it's started to dry up here. So don't assume that the whole area is maintaining the same level of moisture content. And working at an angle does have an impact. I always work at an angle because it's the best way I feel to work with watercolor. But it will draw the moisture down this way. So one of the other suggestions besides using a large brush is make sure your paint is mixed ahead. If you're going to be putting a light wash down, And then you're going to be coming back and doing some brush work just to get some soft edge to try and get some of this effect. Make sure before you wet your paper that you've got the paint you're going to be dropping in this mix, so that you don't wet the paper, then while you're fussing with mixing the paint, your paper's drying. So that can impact it. So now I'm going to take this number 6 brush and I'm going to cover this square. You can see I don't have enough moisture to really get all the way across. And what you really want to do to get a nice coverage is develop a bead of water on the leading edge. And that will give, if you're you have enough moisture there that you can lead a bead, you're going to get more even coverage, and it's going to be 100% coverage. That bead of water is going to coat as you lead it down. Now you see, one of the problems with this though is this brush I'm using takes a while. So while I'm doing this, my paper's already starting to dry up here. So I'm getting pretty good coverage. Now one thing I could do, keep it wet, you needed to get it while it's saturated though, is I can mist it with a bottle, a fine mist, but you have to be careful. If it starts to get damp before you do that, you're going to start to get textures and little droplets that are going to show in it. So the best way is to really saturate your paper and work quickly and be smart in your setup. So now if I look at this, when I want it to be saturated where the paint really moves, it's going to be glossy. But I can already see it's starting to lose its sheen, its gloss up here, and it's just starting to become a satin sheen. So my paper's already started to dry. At the same time, I have more moisture here. So when I'm ready to come back in here, I might have, if I came back in with a loaded brush right now, I might start to get some blossoms, and in fact I probably would, because this is already starting to get to a damp condition rather than really saturated. So it really, this size brush isn't the best to try and work smart and keep your paper wet so that you can get the results you're after. So now if I use this other brush, so I have a big pool of paint, a lot of water, a big, soft, thirsty brush. So now I can really cover this quickly. And the other thing is, I can come back over if you want more moisture, and if you're in a climate where you struggle because it's very dry, don't be afraid to come back right now like this and really load this up with moisture. Now one of the things you have to watch for is when you get to the bottom, you might start your bead might have a little excess there. So you just want to pick that up. But if I was concerned about, oops, I just stuck my finger. If I was concerned about that drying too quickly right now, I can still come back. You can see how that paint is flowing in there? That's very wet. That's hard to do working with this little brush. So I always encourage to work at an angle. Use a brush that is large as you're comfortable with working with. If you're concerned about it drying out, just come back and drop a little bit more while it's still wet. And if you get too much at the bottom, pick it up. Use that bead of water to really coat the page. And be aware of uneven drying. You can see as this moisture come to the edge of here, it's started to draw it in and start to create a blossom. Here, again, I want to watch what's going on. Gravity's continuing to move this, so it's still very fluid and wet here. And I could come in right now and do some of that brush work. And I'm just going to give you an example of that. We'll set this aside. So here's a little sketch. Just a very simple little thing. Now, if I come in here with my little brush, and let's say I'm going to drop this kind of green gold mixture in there. Maybe add a little blue. I'll keep it on this color range. A little red in there. All right. So now I have my little drawing, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to apply a wash. I'm going to wet the paper down to these edges, these kind of little symbolic tree lines I have here. So now I'm trying to bring this down with this smaller brush. You can see I'm getting coverage, but there's not a lot of excess water. And you can see how many times I have to go to my palette. So a lot of work to cover that. So now it's still saturated, and I have my paint mixed. So it is still wet enough to get some of this soft diffusion. So I'm working wet and wet. And I did use the smaller brush, but I worked quickly and I had my paint ready to go. And now this is has additional moisture added because of this mixture that I just put in there. Now I could come and I could put some gold in here and continue to work wet and wet. This would be something if you're starting to paint some trees or so I want to come back and do a little bit more here. So even though I was using a small brush, there's enough moisture in there to allow this to diffuse and give me some nice soft edges. Up here though, if I'm looking sideways, right now this area is starting to get dry. It's lost its gloss that this still has, and it's starting to get a satin finish. And I'm working in a very small area here, so I get a little help in keeping moisture. If this were, say, a quarter sheet painting and I was working with this brush and I was painting the same type of a thing on it, I'd have much more difficulty trying to maintain this moisture level. Now, if I take my big brush, big soft brush here, and now I'm going to coat this, you can see how few times I have to go back to the palette, number one. You can see I'm getting nice coverage. A little excess here. So it's nice and wet. If I wanted to, I can put a little bit more moisture in there. You can see that start to come down. Now I'm going to do the same thing here. And this is going to be very wet. Now I'll come over here and add a little bit of it. Take some of this gold, a little red. Just start to suggest it's still, this is very wet here. So you can see I've been able to maintain the moisture here, but the key is, for me, if you're going to be working on a larger sheet, let's say, make sure, one, I think you should be working at an angle. It gives you more predictable results, but use as big a brush as you feel comfortable with. It should be more along the lines of a wash brush. Really load that brush up and start to apply that layer of water. And don't be afraid to get some more and come back into the area just to really load it up with water, especially if you're in a dry climate. And leave that bead of water to give a good coating. What you don't want is, when you're trying to put this wash down and this is what you're getting, you see that dry texture and then you just start filling it in, you're really going to struggle, I think. You really want to have that bead just give you that nice coverage. If you start painting it like you're painting a wall, you're not going to have enough moisture in your paper. So those are the keys. Be aware of your climate. You may need to experiment. There might be some papers that are more challenging than others. But put down a nice coating of moisture, this can be clear water too if you're doing it, if you're wetting it. You can go over it a couple times with clear water. Some people go this way and this way when they're just really trying to saturate it. And I'm not suggesting soaking it in a bathtub or anything. I'm just saying after you have your painting mounted, your paper mounted, you're going to start painting, you just want to have a nice wet paper. Use a big brush, lead the bead of water down, go over it multiple times if you have to, and if it's also a possibility just to use a fine mist spray. I can still probably use, starting to get a little dry. See how I started to get that texture in there? So that's a little risky. My best suggestion is just really use an appropriate brush, load it up appropriately. Be prepared, make sure you have your paint mixed that you're going to come back in and paint with. So this isn't drying while you're over here mixing it. But those are just a few suggestions. I thought I would do this short tip because I have been asked a few questions lately. I hope this is helpful.